So Gran Pregunta today, what is standing between Barcelona and the treble? And the reason we asked that is because for most of the off-season and the beginning of the year, we've said, let's not prioritize the Copa del Rey. You don't want to put everybody in there and go for it completely because you want to try to prioritize the Champions League and La Liga. But the way that Barcelona played yesterday, led by Lionel Messi in the Copa del Rey, all indications, Levon, are that they are all in, not just on the Copa del Rey, but they seem to be wanting and engaged in every single competition they're playing in.
Yeah, they do. I mean, what stands between us and the treble is really what stands between us and the Champions League, because that's the big one. Without Champions League, you're not going to win a treble. I think as long as Valverde keeps it like calm and does not go all out for the Copa del Rey and rotates a lot during the league, we will have a chance to win the Champions League. And if Barcelona wins the Champions League, we have a chance to win it all. But the most important thing would still be rotation, rotation, rotation. So in order to actually go for that mythical treble that everybody dreams about, and really shouldn't care about that much or at all even, because we already have one treble more than any other club in the world. What they should just do is focus on winning the one trophy that is most difficult to win for Barcelona, which is the Champions League.
Yeah, and it's funny because it seems like the fans are in one corner, and Messi certainly said, no, we prioritize and care about the Copa as well. 30 Copa del Reys for the club, which is more than anybody else in Spain. Barcelona at the moment have won 4 straight trophies and 7 of the last 10 La Liga titles as well. So they have consistently competed, and as I was getting into the other day on social media, that this run of just Copa del Reys and La Liga titles is just utter dominance in Spain. And they've dominated Spain, but unfortunately in the court of public opinion, which is now a global game, it seems that the Champions League eluding them. And yet, again, that's the irony too, that they won 3 of the last 10 Champions League trophies, which is a run that every other club in the world would dream about as well, just capturing that amount of success. And not to mention 6 of the last 10 Spanish Super Cups. And it's almost to a point where, not that we've taken trophies for granted, but we almost take the prestige of certain competitions for granted. And the question that we still have to ask, even by beating Sevilla, and now we're in the semifinals of the Copa del Rey, how important is the Copa del Rey?
Well, everybody has to decide that for himself. At a global level, even last week, there was this thing in England where the coach of Tottenham Hotspur, Pochettino, said that he prefers to become reach the 4th place in the domestic league than to advance in the FA Cup. Now, the FA Cup has a lot more, the history of the FA Cup is a lot more glorious than of the Copa del Rey.
Yeah, a lot more prestige, of course, yeah.
Yeah, it has a lot more prestige. So for him to say, I don't care about the FA Cup that much. What I really want is to be 4th in the league so that I can go to the Champions League.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense, because just participating in the Champions League, not even getting to the second round, but just participating, I think clubs already make more money.
Yep, you're right. There it is.
Than actually winning the whole domestic cup. And it's the same in Spain. You don't get a lot of money for it. It's basically a second-tier competition. We are an elite club. Should an elite club care that much about a second-tier competition?
Yeah, I mean, this almost parlays itself into, we never even talked about this on the show, but that all these the rumors that are created about the Super League potentially. And you're right that there's a certain level of club. It's Bayern Munich. You know who they are. It's Munich. It's Juventus. It's Real Madrid. It's Man City. It's in a sense it is Liverpool if they're finally able to capture the Premier League title, which is one that's eluding them. But there's a level of club that the FA Cup and the Copa del Reys and basically anything in league just takes a back seat. Now, winning your league is still, because of the amount of fixtures you play, is still an important thing to do. That when Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid, those 2 other teams to capture the La Liga title in the last 10 years, when they do it, it's a big deal. But for the Copa del Rey, it is something that Barca have captured 30 of them in their history, and now that they've won 4 straight, for clubs like Bilbao, Betis, and I mean Sevilla have done a lot of winning on their own as well, so this isn't anything to take away from Sevilla's recent success. but there is a certain type of club, even, and I really do. Bilbao sticks out to us because if Bilbao, who isn't often in the Champions League just because of, again, they are a second-tier club in Spain even, but historically they're a top-tier club in Spain. The history and prestige of the name Bilbao, winning the Copa del Rey winds up being a big deal. And we also do talk about, again, the prestige, as you mentioned, of the FA Cup. It's a big deal in England, or it has been. But because of the money associated with the Champions League, again, you hit this right on the nail on the head here, that because of the money in the Champions League, the domestic clubs have all taken a back seat and just don't have the importance they used to. And it's funny when you hear guys, even Arsene Wenger back in the day with Arsenal, you hear the words that he says during press conferences and the way they talk about the competitions has changed fundamentally in the last, I'd say even 5-10 years, over the course of this last decade. The way we talk about domestic cups is changed. And for Barcelona, I think the counter argument to all of that, of rotation, is that don't Barcelona and those big clubs have the depth in talent to just be able to say, okay, we can start Eleni in the Copa del Rey, and in the league, meanwhile, it's 5 points clear of Atletico, 10 points clear of Sevilla, but yet if Barcelona were to falter or rotate too much in the league, then all of a sudden Atletico Madrid is right on your tail. So it seems to me that rotation is the counter argument to or why Barcelona should be competing, at least in all three. And again, I think trying to compete and win all three is different than not being satisfied if Barcelona don't win a treble. Does that make sense? That those are two different ideas.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also agree, now we're in the semifinals. I don't know when the draw is, but even if we draw Madrid, and for pure selfish reasons, I hope that they draw Madrid because it means that I get to go to the stadium and see them play Madrid again.
Yeah.
But when they do, I hope that maybe in the first leg, Carlos Aleñá can start. So I hope that even if it's against a really strong opponent like that Valverde does not feel obliged to play his Gala 11 against Madrid just because it's Madrid and it's a semi-final of the Copa del Rey. Rotation is key. Like I said, if we want to treble, the only way we can actually get a treble is if we win the biggest trophy in that treble.
Mm-hmm.
And if we win any of those three trophies, I think it should be the biggest one, which is the Champions League.
So really the question we're reframing this as is what can stand in the way of Barcelona winning that treble. Now, off air, we started by talking about this and saying that, you don't need to say an injury to Messi. I think an injury to Messi means that if you don't win a Champions League or any of the trophies, it's almost a mulligan because obviously I think, Messi is the driving force, so nothing becomes an expectation anymore. With that double negative there, it's silly, but as we mentioned, Messi is just again the focal point of what Barcelona are, what they do, and without him it'll be tough. But in injury to another major player, now we've seen Dembele has gone down in a way that Coutinho went down earlier in the season. But I think the guy that I think about the most, and Umtiti's been out for a long time too. Let's not forget. So if Piqué or Lenglet were to suffer an injury, you'd have a problem. Alba, can he continue playing every match? And as much as we talked about depth of squad, it seems that Barcelona can be very light because while I think the backups can handle La Liga and Copa del Rey moving forward, there's no other guy that you trust at left back in the knockout stages of the Champions League other than Alba. Lenglet and Piqué and Umtiti just doesn't seem like he'll be able to get back anytime soon. They have him not having surgery. We'll see what happens. But if it's not those two, then who? And the same thing goes for Suarez up top. And I think having Dembele and Coutinho and not to say different guys being able to fill in on the wings, but Barcelona have managed when they've gone down because there's been you have that two-pronged monster, if you will, of Coutinho and Dembele. It is either or. Same thing with right back. It's either or Roberto and Semedo. I think either one are good enough to be starting in those Champions League matches. But those other positions of need, one little injury is the worry, and not even that, but with Alba, it might just wind up being fatigue, and you'd worry about him in that spot because, again, Suarez now has Kevin Prince Boateng to start some La Liga and Copa del Rey matches for him, but for Alba, I don't know what happens.
Absolutely. The idea at the beginning of the season was for Miranda to fill that role. He did okay when he played against Tottenham, actually. But then the last match which he played, he was just terrible. I still think that we should trust Miranda against, let's say, lesser opponents, not only because it's good for his development. I also think that a club like Barcelona, um, even when they play Miranda, can still beat an opponent in La Liga who does not have Messi and Suarez and Dembele and Artur and Rakitic and Busquets and Piqué and Mats ter Stegen on their squad. So the idea of like that we cannot play a youth player who is not necessarily at our level, to me, it always seems a little bit ridiculous because of the insane quality that we have on the team. Um, but in the Champions League, that is definitely a sore spot, which is why it's so important that we rotate Jordi Alba. Last season, it showed that Alba played too many games. That those last 10, 15 matches, he did look tired. Maybe if Umtiti gets back, he will be able to fill in at left back if something were to happen to Alba. I mean, I guess that would be the most logical choice against one of the big hitters in the Champions League, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that I was thinking about this the other day too, that when in the last 2 3 years, when you think back to the times that we've seen, not, I mean, Miranda obviously was this year, but when we've seen even Carlos Alenya in the last 2 years in the Copa del Rey, the matches they feature in, and I do mean like the B players and the lesser players, or bench players, if you will, Denis Suarez, et cetera, et cetera. When those guys feature, it's a full rotation. So I've thought about it, and Ricky Puig, for all that we talk about his potential, he really hasn't got on the field with Messi. And I think that's part of the problem that I'm seeing, is that instead of putting Puig into the last 10 minutes of the Liga game, because Barcelona B are playing on weekends as well, so you want to keep Puig getting full matches with Barcelona B, he only plays those midweek Copa del Rey matches when Messi isn't playing, because then Messi has to come on his white horse and save them in the second legs. So Puig's only shot, I know he didn't play in the first leg against Sevilla, but his only shot this season has been to play in the first leg of the Copa del Rey. And I think that's a little bit of an indictment. That's, I think, the one issue that I think Valverde has done a much better job, and we're about to transition to La Ronda and talk about Valverde in a second, so we'll leave this here, is that my issue then with Valverde in this is that instead of utilizing your younger players and assimilating them to a team that has 9 or 10 regulars, they're being assimilated to teams that have 3 or 4 regulars and then 5 or 6 other guys that are also being rotated, or 5 or 6 other guys that are also paying bench roles. So, I mean, with Miranda, I think he should be starting next to Lenglet, Piqué, and Roberto or Semedo. And then that's the whole point. And then in front of him would be Busquets and Artur or Rakitic. And you rotate in that manner to give him all the tools where he's going to succeed, where he's the one guy being rotated in this instance, as opposed to, again, every other time when Miranda looks up in front of him on the left wing, and instead of having Dembele or Coutinho, we're talking about Denis Suarez, who has moved on to Arsenal, of course, now. But, you know, I think that's where I would hope that Valverde would have a little bit of, give them the tools, as we've said, to be able to rotate them in that manner. But how he juggles that with their Barca B, playing on weekends, that kind of thing. But I think that's the whole point, that Barca B, the focus of that is to facilitate to the A team. And I'm not too worried that Pimienta isn't going to be able to call somebody up or find some other midfield talent. There's so many of them. I profile them in La Masia profiles. There are so many center midfielders in La Masia at all times that Pimienta, maybe it might be a year too young. You know, it might be a 16 or 17-year-old, but there are still so many talented players that could just feature in 10, 15 minutes for Barcelona B, and I wouldn't be too worried.